Hello, welcome back to my channel and to my Louis Feuillade retrospective. And today we're talking about Les Vampires, which many people regard as the best in Feuillade's cycle of crime serials. Now, what's interesting about this film, there's two things worthy of note here. The first is that this was largely made in 1915 and shown in 1916. So it's made during the height of the Great War, the First World War. Though, to be honest, for most of its running time, you wouldn't know it. It's a pure piece of escapism. The only two bits which recalled the war to me is one bit where the main villain, the Grand Vampire, says, "I'm going to destroy them with my cannon." And this fireplace, slides back, and this little cannon trundles out into the living room. It's hilarious. And it's an electric cannon, so it doesn't make any noise and it doesn't make any spark. And it fires this shell straight at this nightclub where two women are doing a Scottish jig. That's the wonderful surrealism of Louis Feuillade. The other thing to remark upon is that there's one shot where, with this little cannon, the Grand Vampire destroys a ship, and you see the ship blow up, and it's clearly newsreel footage of a ship blowing up in wartime, which is kind of bad taste when you think about it. I mean, many of the French critics didn't like Feuillade's films. They thought they were immoral and tasteless. And it is a bit tasteless to use some found footage of an exploding ship just for an adventure sequence. But that's really the only symbols you get of the war. The other thing that's noticeable about this film is that whereas Fantomas was based on a series of novels, this is written and directed by Feuillade. It's a pure auteur work. And it's interesting, it's like, when George Lucas made the second trilogy of Star Wars films, he wrote and directed them, so they became more of his authorial project. He had complete control. And Feuillade has complete control over the material in this film. And it's noticeable that it slows down a bit. It's got a slower pace than Fantomas. And there's more character development and more of a through narrative. So that what happens is that the protagonist, Guérin, this journalist who's fighting the vampires, this criminal gang, later on in the film, he falls in love with someone, he gets engaged to her, they have an engagement meal, and during the engagement meal, the concierge of the building gets poisoned by this poisoned champagne. And then his widow comes back in the next episode, and she becomes the love interest of one of the other heroes, Mazamet, who we'll talk about in a moment. And she also takes on her own campaign against the vampires. So there's more of a through line of development rather than just set piece after set piece that we saw with Fantomas. So it's much more of an authorial project. I will confess to you right from the beginning that I prefer Fantomas, really for two reasons. The first is that this restoration that you've got on the Eureka box set is not as good a restoration as the restoration of Fantomas. First of all, I don't like the musical score as much, and that makes such a difference in Fantomas. And secondly, it doesn't have the original tinting, which is such an important part of the enjoyment of old restored silent films. The tinting was there in the original film, but for some reason it's not there in this restoration. So it's just this kind of rather grey, dull, black and white all the way through. The second reason is this. Fantomas had these two wonderful characters facing off against each other. Fantomas the villain and Juve, the dogged inspector who's always on his trail. The problem with Les Vampires is this. It has a main hero called Guérin, who's this young journalist, and he's rather dull. He's just a nice guy, right? And opposite him, and I'm going to some spoilers here, so if you don't want the plot spoiled, please go and watch it now, because there's going to be spoilers for the rest of the video. Opposite him, first of all, you get this lead vampire. And halfway through the series, Irma Vep, who we're going to talk about, his cohort, shoots him. And he seems to die. And you're on a cliffhanger and you think, surely he can't die. But he does die, right? And then the next episode, it's revealed that he's not the main vampire. There's a grand vampire called Satanas. And Satanas comes along and takes over the story. Then he poisons himself in a cell. And you think, no, he's not dead. It's one of those poisons that just makes you look like you're dead. But no, he is dead, right? And then another vampire comes along He takes over the story. He's a poisoner called Venomous. And he goes to the end of the film. The problem is that neither Guérin's the hero, nor these three nemeses are terribly interesting. None of them have the charisma of Fantomas. It's a real shame, and for me, it's a bit of a lack in Les Vampires. What Feuillade does instead is he builds up the secondary characters. Now, the most famous of these secondary characters, and has gone down in legend, is Irma Vep, which is an anagram of vampire, isn't it? Yes. Now, Irma Vep is played by Musidora. Musidora was a young dancer and actress. She'd already become quite famous, and this was her big moment. This is what made her famous in France. And what I realised watching Musidora in this is she's the first femme fatale, right? So we first see her in this kind of dive, this kind of music hall dive, and she's singing on stage, and it's a fantastic performance. She's got this sort of black coal round her eyes, and she's singing like this, and she's like some kind of woman of the French resistance, or some figure from Delacroix, you know. She's got this wonderful French, you know, energy and vitality and, you know, rebelliousness. And she's laughing and slapping her thigh with all the gents, and they're all crowding around her thinking she's wonderful. And throughout the film, she will be both the muse and the partner of these three denizens of power and the vampires. And she'll also hook up with someone else. So she's a real, you know, and she's a real badass. She gets involved, she shoots people, she takes on disguises, she outwits people, she jumps out of a building with cord wrapped around her and sort of unwinds. She's fantastic, and one of the great things about her is when she dies, she gets shot at the end. Her last act before she dies is she shakes her fist at the hero. I mean, that's the kind of badass girl that is kind of sexy to everyone everywhere, men and women. It's slightly spoiled that halfway through she actually falls in love with someone, and that sort of blunts her claws a little bit, but she comes back fighting in the last two episodes, don't worry. The thing about Musidora, right, is Feuillade really puts her and the other actors through their paces. She has to do stunts. At one point, he has her lying underneath a rolling train. At another point, she has to get out of a car through the window while the car is moving. And she does it, and she's really brilliant at it. And the other thing about Musidora is, what she's famous for, right, is she appears in 2 or 3 scenes in this figure-hugging, all-in-one body stocking with a mask, you know, with heels, which is quite a sexy image. What's interesting, actually, is she's not the first woman in the film to appear in this body stocking. In the second episode, there's a brilliant sequence, one of the great set pieces of the film, where there's a ballet sequence. Guérin goes to see this ballet sequence at night. In some subtitle translations of the title cards, they reveal that the ballet dancer is actually Guérin's fiancée. I think this is a mistranslation because Guérin gets a fiancée later on, who becomes part of the action. But anyway, she's doing this incredible act where she plays a vampire bat. And she appears in this black figure-hugging costume with black wings. And she sort of descends on this poor innocent maiden. It's a brilliant set piece. It recalls that theatre sequence from Fantomas when you're looking in depth at the theatre in the distance. It's a gorgeous sequence. And that seems to be where Irma Vep gets her personality and her costume from. So it doesn't seem to be an original idea of hers. But that's what she's kind of famous for, this figure-hugging costume, this sexy woman wandering around hotels at night, robbing jewels in this, you know, this one-piece silk stocking or whatever it is. So Musidora, this first femme fatale, she's really the star of the film. She's the sort of Marilyn Monroe or Raquel Welch of this movie. But there are 2 other secondary characters we need to talk about here. The first is Mazamet, played by Marcel Levesque. Now, Marcel Levesque was a comic actor. He'd appeared in some of Feuillade's very successful comedies at the time, often with child actors. Now, in this, he plays this character called Mazamet, and Mazamet is the comic relief. He's the sidekick to Guérin, the journalist. And I think he's very funny, and I think he's one of the great pluses of Les Vampires. And the first scene he appears in, the very first scene of the film, Guérand is in his offices at this French newspaper, and someone has nicked his stuff. And it's revealed that it's Mazamet. And Mazamet is quite funny. He's revealed to be a vampire. He's part of this really terrible gang of robbers and thieves and killers. And he's part of them. And he makes this excuse that he's doing it all for his boy to put him through education. And right from the very beginning, Mazamet looks to the camera, and we are aligned with him. And his whole performance is almost that of a stand-up comic. He's almost like Chaplin or Keaton bringing us in on his joke and going like this. And he's very funny, and he does that all the way through the film. And there's hilarious moments, like, for example, where Guérand gets captured by the vampires, and they're all in these black hoods. And then, one of them is left behind with him, and he rips off his hood, and it's Mazamet, and he says, "It's me! Isn't it great? It's me." And so he's been taking part in these terrible exploits with the vampires, but we're supposed to love him, and we do. And he comes good, and him and Guérand earn loads of money fighting the vampires. They become firm friends, and eventually Mazamet, marries the pretty girl at the end. So he's a huge part of the enchanting nature of this series. And at one point, his son actually appears. Typical kind of, naughty youth, sort of naughty but likeable youth that appeared in some of Feuillarde's comedies. And he actually looks to the audience and brings us in on his jokes and laughs at the adults. He needs a good... Anyway. And then there's a third figure in this film, and this is one of the geniuses of Les Vampires. And this figure is Moreno. I think it's the 4th or 5th episode, the vampires are preparing to, prey on another American millionaire or whatever who's come over from abroad who's got loads of money, more money than sense, and only to discover that Moreno himself is a con man and a thief. And they say, "Oh, he's one of us," and they all go, "Oh, God." And it's a brilliant idea that they get caught out trying to steal from one of their own, right? But then they decide to steal from him anyway. And Moreno gets angry and decides to take his revenge. So now Les Vampires have another nemesis, and he becomes an important figure in the story. And that's a wonderful new angle that Feuillade brings into it. And Moreno becomes important because he becomes the lover of Irma Vep, rather unbelievably in my opinion. So there's a lot going on in this series. I can't imagine anyone not liking this series. It's so much fun. It's so well made. It's got all the great sequences that you associate with Feuillade. You've got panels, paintings sliding down, revealing hooded figures looking over you at bed at night. People coming and staring in your skylight. People climbing up walls and doing death-defying stunts across the roofs of Paris. There's one wonderful sequence where all these people are invited to a ball and they're all gassed. And then the doors open silently and all these hooded figures come out to steal all their jewels. All these kind of weird, surreal, bonkers sequences. It's also kind of noticeable. There's something like a child's game about Louis Feuillade. For example, Mazamet, all the way through, he keeps hiding behind curtains. It's very sweet. Like a child's hide-and-seek game. And he kind of hides behind a curtain, and then the villains come in unsuspecting and start doing things. And then he comes out the curtain and goes, ta-da! And starts shooting at them or whatever. So it's a lot of fun. There are some sequences that are quite striking. At one point, Guérand's fiancée, the villains loop a noose round her neck from the street below and yank her down. Like, wow, that's a bit horrible. And there's also a severed head turns up in a box. I mean, it's no wonder some critics thought this stuff was tasteless. But God, it's fun. I still prefer Fantomas, but if you've never seen Les Vampires, it's actually one of the longest films ever made. It's nearly 7 hours long. It's a blast from start to finish. Next time, Judex.